So let's get the numbers out of the way. So this is the number 34th ranked album in the 1970s by Best Ever Albums. It ranks number 4 in 1973, number 130 of all time. And like Boston, maybe the only thing like Boston, it is not in Rolling Stone's list. So 2 non-Rolling Stone albums in a row. So the first time, like I said, we covered Genesis for the first time with their third album, Foxtrot, in episode. I'm sorry, that was their fourth album. This is actually their fifth. I think I misspoke earlier. I always forget about that album that made its way to the religious bins because they didn't know what they were. The record store managers didn't know what they were getting. So this is their fifth album. Foxtrot was their fourth. Selling England by the Pound was recorded in August of 1973 and released on October 13th of 1973. Frontman Peter Gabriel and lead singer Peter Gabriel called it a happy and calm period in the band's history. There is a single on this album. It was their first big single. I Know What I Like was a single. It was the first hit to break the top 30 in the United Kingdom. It peaked at number 21, and it was so successful that the band was invited to play it on the British television show Top of the Pops, but the band declined that invitation.
You know about Top of the Pops too, right? They like lip sync a song, which is kind of hilarious when you think of. Oh yeah, you guys aren't familiar with. Oh,
I know Top of the Pops. I don't know much about it though.
There's a fantastic thing of just the certain people just despise going on Top of the Pops because they don't want to lip sync, and so you name it, snotty bands like they all go on Top of the Pops, which is fascinating in its own right. But I always think there's like Morrissey on Top of the Pops is pretty fucking funny when he's in the Smiths because he's like doing all different type of stuff, and there's different bands that would like go out of their way to make you know they were lip syncing. I also always remember like the Specials on one because they look like they're completely like you've got Terry Hall in the front and he's like deadpan and the rest of them are like jumping over and doing stuff and he's making it a point for you to know that he's just like not anyway. Top of the Pops is really funny. Yeah. So
well, Genesis never
Peter
got
Gabriel
that.
doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. He was like, yeah, we're not doing that. So we don't get to see that. That's not a YouTubeable moment. So the band completed their Foxtrot tour in May of 1973, and the label wanted to capitalize on that successful tour. They were starting to get a little bit more of a following. They pressured the band to release some new material, but they didn't really have any. So they actually released a live album in July called Genesis Live. So that kind of is in the middle of Foxtrot and Selling England by the Pound. The label also gave Genesis up to 3 months into the studio to work on the new album, which was at that time it was a lot of time to be working on an album. And Mike Rutherford actually said that this was kind of like to the detriment overall, he felt, because they kind of went into the studio with not a lot of material, and some of the stuff that they started working with, they just, because they had so much time, they kept reworking it and trying this and adding that, and some of the songs just either got worse or just became a mess, or they just ended up back where they started. So it was a little bit of a frustrating recording experience for some of the band members. But they did come in with a number of different parts. It was a fairly collaborative effort. The songs are credited. Have writing credits for every member of the band. Steve Hackett had a number of guitar licks. He didn't really have full pieces. He just had some licks here and there that ended up being certain songs. And they would jam like Collins and Rutherford and Hackett. There would be different combinations of the guys that would be, jamming, and they would kind of come up with a song. So pretty much every song was, a collaboration between at least a couple members of the band. But they all are attributed for writing credit on all songs. So I can go through all. I'll talk about like which songs were written by who later, but the reviews of this album were a little mixed at the time. Rolling Stone's Paul Gambaccini praised the band for attempting something utterly different amongst a stagnant pop scene, but he also criticized the album's lyrics, feeling that they overused British pop culture references. Robert Christgau, one of the words he used to describe this album was snooty. Retrospective reviews of the album have been more positive, but actually the band was pretty critical later on. So, Mike Rutherford and Tony Banks did not like the second part of Dancing with the Moonlit Knight, felt it was too busy. Peter Gabriel didn't like the chorus of I Know What I Like. He said that was boring. Tony Banks said that the lyrics that he wrote for Firth of Fifth were the worst ones that he's ever written. That everybody thought that the lyrics for the Battle of Epping Forest were way too busy, and even Peter Gabriel, who wrote all of them, was like, "Yeah, that was a bit much. I shouldn't have done all that." Banks and Peter Gabriel hated After the Ordeal. They didn't want that included on the album. That was pretty much a Steve Hackett instrumental that they tried to do something else with, but it didn't really work out, so they just made it this instrumental. And Tony Banks just felt the album was too long. So it's interesting. I watched a documentary that they did in 2007 about it, and they're very critical of themselves. And it always falls into like usually being critical of other members' contributions. Banks criticizing his lyrics, and Gabriel criticizing his lyrics for Battling Up of Epping Forest. That was a little bit of a rare thing. Usually they were criticizing somebody else's contribution. But there were some artists that really did like this album. Rush's drummer Neil Peart says that he, quote, "I think Selling England by the Pound is an enduring masterpiece of drumming. Beautiful drumming, lovely sound, and the arrangements. I think they really nailed the best of what the band was as an entity could have done with that album." Robert Powler of Guided by Voices said that Selling England by the Pound is one of my top 10 records of all time. And John Lennon, also in a radio interview, talked about how much he liked the record. The album cover was actually the first one not created by Paul Whitehead. He had done the first, the three main albums that preceded this. This was a painting by a woman named Betty Swanwick, which was entitled "The Dream." The band really liked her artwork, and they met with her. She was kind of an eccentric woman that had a parrot sitting on her shoulder, and actually was sitting on Peter Gabriel's shoulder. And when she was talking to them, some of the band members couldn't tell if she was actually talking to them or was she talking to the parrot. So she was a little bit of a eccentric woman. But they really liked her artwork, and they decided they didn't have enough time for her to do a new piece. So she took this dream painting, and she added the lawnmower on the bottom left-hand corner to go along with the song "I Know What I Like." So this is Genesis's highest ranked album on Best Ever Albums. I'm curious to know what we think. So I think, Josh, it's your turn to go first. What do you think here, Josh?
Well, I liked it, and I think it's more. I liked it more than their previous album that we talked about, Foxtrot, and I think and on some level, I feel like this is kind of what Genesis is all about. In a way, I think it like exemplifies their sound. It's still in the prog vein, and it's still a complicated album. So I can pick out parts of songs that I like, but as a whole song, I'm not sure like it entirely works for me. And that's kind of been the same refrain I've said for like every prog rock album we've talked about. I'm not, but I really like a lot about this album. I like the guitars a lot. Like across the board, they're really good. I like that they're doing the this album also feels more British. I don't know if that's intentional, like with the songs and the lyrics and stuff, right?
Yeah, Gabriel was going. He specifically said that he was interested in looking at Englishness in a different way. He said he was commenting on the decay of English folk culture and an increase in Americanism. So that was definitely part of what he was going for. And when he would sing "Dancing with the Moonlit Knight" in concert, he would get in full blown like British knight kind of regalia and paint his head, and he's got these elaborate costumes. So yeah, he was very much into that. That's very true. Good job, Josh.
I definitely caught that on a number of levels. I mean, I think the Battle of Epping Forest, they reference Robin Hood a lot, and it may just be all about Robin Hood.
And that song was actually about, there was like a gang rivalry that he read about briefly in the paper, and he didn't find out anything more about it, so he just created his own story about these two gangs fighting it out in the streets. So yeah.
I feel like there's some Mellotron on this album.
Oh, a little bit, you think? Yeah. Yep.
So I like that as well. And I like Phil Collins singing on this album. More Fool Me, I think that's kind of a more gentle acoustic song, and he's singing on that. So that kind of harkens to later Genesis, where he kind of takes over and maybe more a traditional type of sound or structure to the song. I also heard like almost on After the Ordeal, there's like some Queen sounding guitar in a way.
The electric guitar at the end.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I picked that out. I thought the Cinema Show was a bit much. I feel like I mean, is it the longest song? It's one of the longest songs on there.
It's either that or well, it could be Epping Forest. I'll check it. I'll look at that.
Yeah, something about that and kind of the lull and the flow of the song kind of really lost me. It starts out about Romeo and Juliet and then transitions into something else, and it feels like there's every instrument ever created in this in the song. It's just too much for me. But overall, I think the strengths for me are the guitars, the singing by Collins. I like too when him and Gabriel or I guess, how many people sing on this band? Is it just Gabriel and Collins?
It's mostly Gabriel. Collins will sing some backup, and he does do the lead on More Fool Me.
Okay. Yeah, I like when they harmonize it. I think they do that a few times on the songs.
Yes.
So yeah, there's definitely things I like about Genesis and about this album. It's still, and I think as a in like the prog rock hierarchy for me, they're up there in the upper tier, but there's still little things here and there that like bother me and it doesn't entirely cohere for me in one form.
Okay. All right. After the cinema show is 10:41 in length. Battling Up in Forest is 11:43. So
okay. Yeah.
The second longest track on it.
Yeah.
John.
There's a lot of interesting stuff going on here, but this album falls in the category of appreciate the musicianship, don't really love the product, to be quite honest with you. I agree with Mr. Banks. This album's too long. I think this one would have benefited from being one of those albums that was, say, 4 or 5 tracks that maybe were long and they blended together for like a 40 to 42 minute runtime. I think once it got to the 50, the shorter tracks sort of intruded into the bigger ones. There is one of my pet peeves on this album, which is that medieval folk sound, which is a real difficult sound for me. It comes just enough that I always want it to go away so the album starts sounding good again. And like that, it's just, I had to train myself to listen to the parts of the album that were with it, because that medieval folk sound is so unappealing to me. And once I was able to do that, I was able to, the drumming is excellent on this album. It really is. And much like I said that Paul McCartney is such an underrated bassist, that you realize that whenever you listen to his stuff, like Phil Collins is so underrated as a drummer. He really is an exceptional drummer. He does interesting things. He doesn't really fill. He's kind of like a jazz drummer in some ways at times, but he has an authority with the sticks in terms of how his sound is, that it's he's able to kind of play in that jazz way where he doesn't get in the way, but he hits with a firmness that's enough that he's around the song, that's really, really hard to do. I don't know if I'm doing a good job of explaining that, but
he said you're kind of alluding to something that he said in that interview that I saw. He said that he was inspired by a jazz fusion group at the time called Mahasvinu. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this, Mahasvishnu Orchestra, which is some sort of, yes, exactly, right. But that was, so he was interested in those guys, and that inspired him to come up with more complicated time signatures. So he's purposefully kind of emulating a jazz fusion band that did these kind of off time signatures. So.
Well, and his time signatures are, sometimes they're off, but sometimes they're very much on time. But it's just he speeds it up, but you can see what he's anyway. That's kind of what Phil Collins is doing here. The guitar parts are interesting at times. I wouldn't say virtuoso, but there's solos in this, which is different than Foxtrot, where I didn't feel like I heard as many guitar solos, right? And when I say solos, it's not big soaring,
right,
super plugged in. It's more, bits and pieces where they take a piece of it. Peter Gabriel, I struggle with him sometimes vocally. He's got a quintessential Britishness, which is not a problem for him. And then on this album, even more so, right? Because I was able to pick up the British theme too. It was all over his lyrics. But he's got a quintessential Britishness. When I think of his solo career, there's it's a mix between like shocking emotional urgency, mixed with like detachment in other songs, right? And it's a odd combo because he goes from like detached to urgent. And on this album, and in the Genesis days, he's more like rock opera would be the best way. You know what I'm saying? Like he's kind of doing what Roger Daltrey did in The Who on those rock operas, and we've heard later we would know sort of what Rush would sound like and stuff. But the prog they're doing, it's very. I'm struggling a little bit to articulate it. They do prog in a different way than that Yes does for sure. And they're similar to Jethro Tull in terms of what Peter Gabriel's doing, but not necessarily musically. They're more grounded in almost art rock type stuff. So, I know, Matt, you love this album, and I want to give you enough space to be able to talk about it. But I'm very mixed on it. Like there's a level of musicianship that you have to respect, but it leaves me a little bit cold. Yeah.
It's I do really like this album. I've liked it for many years. I can't tell you where it ranks. I think this is one of their better produced albums. And we didn't cover Trespass or Nursery Crime, but there's some great moments that I really like on those albums as well. But if you listen to those, the production is definitely substandard compared to like Foxtrot, and particularly Selling England by the Pound. So they're definitely taking a step up here production wise. The guitars that you're hearing, a lot of the guitar on here is a lot of 12-string guitar, and I think that's where you're getting a little bit of that medieval feeling. And actually, Steve Hackett doesn't even do that. That's Mike Rutherford he does a lot of that 12-string guitar work.
Okay.
Yeah, Steve Hackett does more of the. He does that big guitar solo in Firth of Fifth, so that's considered one of, if not the biggest guitar solos in the career of Genesis. That's widely regarded.
I was caught off guard by the guitar solos because I don't think of Genesis in any era as having guitar solos. So
and this album is also seen as Hackett having a little bit more, Hackett and Collins as well, because remember they came to the band later, but they saw them as kind of establishing themselves as a little bit more confident in their role in the group, and their contributions to the songs, because Phil Collins, a lot of the stuff that came that's on this album came from just jamming, impromptu jamming that the members did, and Collins and Hackett were certainly a part of that. So I get it. This is certainly not for everybody. I've listened to this for many years. Many times, and like I said, maybe in a previous episode, this is, if you're going to really get into Genesis, at least for me, it's homework, right? You got to listen to it multiple times to kind of really appreciate it. I think Cinema Show is a great example of that, because I think initially I thought it was just okay, and now it's one of my favorite Genesis songs. I love that song. It's just so, I love the way it builds. That I could totally see why it might be off-putting. The keyboard is very prominent. That organ and all the stuff that Banks is doing at the end can be seen as a bit much. I love it. I think it builds. I think it's got this, and then you've got the guitar strumming, the dun, 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 in the background. And it's just the way that builds. I love it. It's one of my favorite songs that they do. And then it goes into Isle of Plenty, which is basically a reprise of the opening track, Dancing with the Moonlit Knight. So I like the way that's bookended.
I think one of the things I don't like in prog rock in general sometimes is something that I don't like in that medieval folk that I like. Sort of that idea of that kind of that sound, that repetitiveness of and then it builds and it's kind of that, what you were saying at the end of that song that you like so much, that urgency. I don't know, that has never been a sound that I love. Kind of, it almost feels like a gimmick a little bit, and it doesn't with these guys as much because they're talented, but it can be a gimmick in other stuff. I think for me,
it's a unique type of genre, and that's why it's like a niche. But the people that love it freaking love it.
Oh
sure. But I think Firth of Fifth is a very strong track. That piano part in the beginning is great. I actually have a funny story about that. You guys know my summer camp that I worked at, Mind Stretchers, all those years. They would do a talent show. So this is a summer camp. Yeah, I have 14 T-shirts. It's all on a blanket now. I had them made into a quilt, but anyway. But they would have it every week that we had the camp. The camp ran for 4 weeks, 4 different groups of kids every week, and there was always a talent show at the end of the week that kids could do. There was this kid, I don't remember his name, but he was this little like chunky, nerdy kid that was probably like 12 years old. And in the talent show, he played the beginning of Firth the Fifth note perfect. I was blown away. Nobody else knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
None of the other counselors or the staff or the kids. They just thought it was this interesting piece of piano work. This kid was my hero. I was like, that's amazing. He did it perfectly. And I just was so bummed that nobody else could share that with me because I knew exactly what he was doing, and it was phenomenal.
What another counselor should have done is taken this poor misguided soul and said, that was really impressive, but let me teach you something else. And then he should have taught him the guitar riff from Peace of Mind. And had it come out the next day. And I think it would have been received. Then everybody would be like, oh man, that's awesome. Yeah.
He probably would have gotten more chicks with that.
Where's
too.
that kid now?
Yeah, I don't know, man, but he was
He
all
started
into
a
it.
prog rock band, and he's probably dressed as a locust at like a Genesis show.
Hey, he was my buddy for that week, man. That was great. But that song is, I mean, I love the way that piano starts, and then you've got it kind of develops. You got the verses there, and then you got the like the flute solo that Gabriel does, that really slow flute solo that is repeated. That's what the guitar solo is. That's what Hackett's doing on that really, that really great sounding guitar solo that he's doing there.
What is that other instrument that is it like, it's not a flute? Is it like a piccolo?
Oboe?
Or like
He's playing the oboe as well.
Is that what? Oh, okay, gotcha. I recognize some sort of woodwind instrument.
Yes.
Yes.
I think that part in Firth the Fifth is actually the flute. It sounds like a flute to me, but he's also playing the oboe at parts in here as well.
Yeah, and I mean, and there was like a greatest hits of like the Mellotron and the Hammond organ and stuff.
Yeah.
Who plays that? And is that
that's Tony Banks?
Tony Banks. Okay.
Yeah. And Tony Banks actually said that in this album he started using the synthesizer, which gave him a much wider range of sounds. That he was used to playing the Hammond organ, I think he said, and so now he got his hands on a synthesizer in addition to the organ and the Mellotron and stuff, and that gave him he was exploring with different sounds that he was able to do. And the Mellotron, actually, I didn't know this till I saw that documentary, but on Dancing with the Moonlit Knight, if there's parts of it where it sounds like there's a chorus in the background, like but that's actually the Mellotron making that sound.
Wow.
That they were able to make that with. So, and I love that opening track, Dancing with the Moonlit Night. I think that there's really cool parts there. There's cool guitar solos. Epping Forest is a busy song. There's some cool moments in it, but I agree, that's a weaker track here for me. It is too long. I never really thought about that with the vocals before, but they're absolutely right. Collins is like, the song has no room to breathe because it's just all these words and like, kind of, it's like, Gabriel's like writing parts of a play, like he's doing these characters and stuff. So it's a bit much. I think, and I've realized this with Genesis albums, that there's no Genesis album that I love start to finish. Like they don't have that epic album. They have every one of their albums of the Peter Gabriel era, at least. All have amazing moments, amazing tracks. Some of my favorite tracks. If I could do a mix of all like my favorite tracks from it would be fantastic for me anyway. But then there's all these other parts there's parts of it that just makes you go, not as much. Yes, I can see why you might not like the shorter songs or they kind of take away or whatever. To me, they're a little bit of a palate cleanser because I think that they're nice. I think that More Fool Me is a really pretty song. I don't know what the problem was with After the Ordeal. I thought that was a cool song too. I like the instrumental there. I don't know why. Banks said a lot of things that Tony Banks hated, I actually really like. So I don't always agree with him, but no, as you guys know, I love this album. I love the musicianship. I don't care about the folksy, medieval stuff. That doesn't bother me at all. Gabriel's goofiness, and I'll talk more about his costumes and which kind of led to his departure from the band. One of the things that led to his departure from the band when we do Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. But that stuff, I can see why it's definitely off-putting for you guys and maybe for other people. But I don't know. This is a band that I've listened to for so long, and they're just so interesting. And there's not really any other bands that sound like them. And I never really get bored of it. That's the thing. And I love seeing the fake Genesis live. Hopefully I'll get to see them in November if Delta variant doesn't ruin that for me. Mm-hmm. But big thumbs up for me. It might take you time. If you listen to it the first time, you might be very puzzled, very like, what the heck's Matt talking about? But again, you're going to have to sit with this one for a while to really get it. If you're going to get it, is my guess anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's always some, it does seem like there's songs you're not going to memorize because there's like too much going on. So that's why I think it rewards re-listening because you'll explore stuff.
In fairness, a dorky kid at Matt's camp did record. So there are always going to be people that can play anything, whether it be this or like, you know, Red Bruschetta by Rush, or there's always somebody that's going to learn any of this stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it lends itself to that, right? If you're a musician, you're probably going to like this more, right? Because you're going to be like, what the hell? You know, like it's just different, you know.
In no way is this album bad, but in no way is this album something I want to revisit either. Yeah. And I know you always say you have to listen to it 4 or 5 times. I don't have that belief of music. I believe after 2 or 3 times, it's, for me personally, I don't want to have to hear an album more than 3 times to get it. Like album. To me, what makes great popular music is that it becomes popular after the 3rd listen. It doesn't have to be the 1st or 2nd. I get it. Albums can be growers. And, you know, in fairness to Genesis, there's enough interesting stuff that the re-listens are never problematic for me. Yeah. But at the end of it, I don't know if I came around to it and said, oh, this has moved from, you know, it never gets to that point for me. Well, and that could just be a limitation on the genre for me, too.
Yeah, and I would say this. It's not like I listened to this. It's not like when I first learned to drink, it's when I first started drinking coffee, which I hated, right? Yeah. And I forced myself to drink coffee. Like, it's not like that. It was kind of like, what is this? I don't know if it's okay. That was kind of cool there, blah, blah. And then I listened to it again. And the more it built up, the more I was like, okay, there's interesting parts here I'm more interested in. Kind of like Lou Reed when we did Berlin, you know, like that was an album I still only listened to once that I'm like, I think I would like to listen to this again and get it. And after like a number of listens, and almost the more I listened to it, the more I would get out of it.
I'm almost certain that if I listened to Berlin 3 times, what I talked about it growing and stuff would have happened. So, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, at the end of album, listen 1, I think sometimes I know, is this one going to be a grower on me? Is this one, do I appreciate it? And it might get to a point, or does it suck? And certainly this doesn't fall in the category 3 by any means, nor did Foxtrot. But I also don't listen to it and go, ooh, you know, if I give this 7 times... I think that, you know, I may do different stuff, but I think the stuff I uncover from it isn't going to be something that pushes it over the edge, if that makes sense.
That's fair. That's fair. No, and I get it. I have another buddy, my buddy Pat's like, I don't want music to be homework. I want to listen to it and have. I know I get that, you know, but I don't know. For me, there's certain albums
it was just so jarring this week too, because you've got like a 26-minute album and then you've got a Boston album. So it's also probably didn't help this week that the other 2 things we were listening to were so different in terms of approach. Yeah. So.
No, but I get that. But to me, like, I don't know, like I feel like the more I get an album, like if I spend a little bit more time with it and I appreciate it way more, like I get so much more into a record like that. Because it's more interesting. Where as opposed to like listening to an album for the first time, really liking it, and then just being like, well, that's it. That's where I'm going to get. I'm not going to feel any better about it than I do right now, which is fine. But to me, it's when you build up and you put the work in and it pays off later on. To me, there's an appealing aspect of that. So, and this is just one of those albums for me. So, but it's certainly not for everybody at the same time.
Did you say that the next album, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, is the last Peter Gabriel album?
Yes. Yep. It's a double album. It is a concept album. It's a rock opera, I should say.
Just doubling down, really.
Yes. And it's the last Gabriel album from. Yes.
It must have been hard to play with how sticky their hands were when they were making these albums, Matt. So.
Well, I will tell you this. The good thing for you guys, there's no like 20-minute song on that. It's I think maybe the longest song on that's like 8 minutes. So there's a lot of songs on it, and it's much more of a.
I was going to say, Josh, when he says that doesn't mean though that there aren't 2 times the songs that are 8 minutes.
No, there's lots of songs. No, it's an hour and a half. It's like the Todd Rundgren album. It's an hour and a half.
Okay.
So,
all right.
But
pack a lunch.
And there's one track on there that's borderline unlistenable. I'll let you pick out which one it is. So, yeah.
Nothing makes me excited about hearing an album more than hearing there's a long unlistenable song on an album.
And find out which one it is.
Yeah, that's your homework. We cover that not next week, but the next time I do Pink Floyd and then I do Genesis again. So, there's your challenge.
Luckily, we get a little respite from long songs that could be unlistenable with Pink Floyd. So.
That's right.
I did notice on Spotify that there's 2 different versions. I listened to the stereo mix or new stereo mix version.
That's probably the better one. That's the one I listened to as well. I didn't even listen to the other one. But I probably have before because when I had the original album. Or not the original album, but when I first got it, it was before they remixed it. So, I remember when they redid it, that it sounded better. So that probably would have been the one I would have recommended.
It's definitely an album that warrants stereo. I feel like you get something
for
out
sure.
of it from that.
Yep. Yeah,
for sure.
And for those of you that apply, drugs.
Yeah. Yes.
That probably helps
That
too for some people. Yeah.
That's another Josh's movie corner down the road.
I was gonna say you can listen to
seen the
Selling
light.
England by the Pound, and then
I get it.
I was gonna, and then you can get Head and listen to that. So yeah,
Right.
Excellent. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, the thing that this band that they did like about this, they didn't complain. All the members felt that this was one of the best album covers, and they all really liked the album title. They thought that was one of their best album titles.
Yeah, it is a good album title. I will say that
I don't
for sure.
I don't agree about the album cover, but I like the title.